Hello, this is Cole Anderson, the independent pianist, coming to you again from a new apartment today. So everything is still in disarray behind me, but I wouldn't want to miss this video for anything, so here we are. Today we are continuing with Liszt's remarkable Première année de pèlerinage, the first year of pilgrimage, the Switzerland set, with the marvelous Au bord d'une source, beside a spring. This piece has got to be one of the most happy inspirations to have ever flowed from Liszt's pen, and it's certainly one that is closest to my heart among all of his works. There's a sense of joy and enchantment in this piece. It really is magic made into sound. This piece is not only miraculous as an evocation of water, but in a similar way to Je dois à la ville d'Este, this piece takes us into the realm of the spirit. The tone for the whole piece is set by an excerpt from a poem by Friedrich Schiller. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with the name, Schiller was one of the most famous German poets and playwrights of the latter half of the 18th century. He died in 1805, but his influence extended well into the 19th century as well. So, for instance, he was an influence on Beethoven, and his text famously served as the basis for the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the famous Ode to Joy. It's possible that Liszt also had Schiller's play in mind for the first piece of this first year of pilgrimage, the Chapelle de Guillaume Tell, the Chapel of William Tell. Schiller also had a famous play based on the legend of William Tell. The three lines that Liszt chose to head this piece are excerpted from a longer poem. It's sometimes called the Morgen Fantasy, the Morning Fantasy. The original poem has a darker turn towards the end that is not present in Liszt's piece. He takes the excerpt at face value. If you're interested in reading the full poem, though, I have included a link in the description box where you can find the original German or an English translation. At any rate, here is the excerpt. In säusende Kühle beginnen die Spiele der jungen Natur. In the whispering coolness begins the play of young nature. And there is a sense of wonder, of play, an Eden-like sense of eyes opening for the first time on a landscape of great beauty and enchantment. There are several ways that Liszt suggests these emotions in this piece. Some of these ways are technical, and some are purely musical. All the technical wizardry in this composition is completely subservient to the musical image. It's one of his most beautiful marriages of technical fact with musical imagination. First of all, you'll notice the frequent crossings of the left hand over the right hand. This technique probably originated with Domenico Scarlatti and was originally a bravura technique, a daredevil kind of move. But here it's very different. It's playful instead. The left hand kind of darts over the right hand with a sense of fun, like a kitten playing with its mother. That was the opening of the piece with the hand crossings. This main theme is just miraculous. It's what an inspiration to have thought of it. It's also an amazing example of what I consider to be true romantic counterpoint, as contrasted to the Baroque kind of Bach and other composers of that time period. This is no fugue, it's not strict counterpoint, but there are four separate, independent elements that have to be put together to make this theme happen. Each element by itself might seem insignificant, but together they make the magic. First, there is a melody in long quarter notes and eighth notes. Then there are these playful jumps from the left hand that I already mentioned, from bass to treble, crossing the right hand. Then we have whispering 16th notes that form a liquid accompaniment. And last but not least, certainly, hidden inside the 16ths, a two-note sighing motive. Taken all together, and we get this wonderful theme. You might even hear the melody in quarter notes, the sigh motive, and the top note of the hand crossing motive as one kind of composite melody like this. This kind of ambiguity is something that I really love about the elusive nature of this theme. You can hear it in many different ways, and once you have picked apart the different elements, there are so many different ways that it becomes apparent to your ear. As the music progresses, you might notice that of the four elements I just mentioned, the two-note sighing motive, which starts out hidden in the accompaniment, is eventually going to take center stage. It glitters out into the open in several places in the very first phrase. Later on, it becomes even more prominent, and the dissonance with the upper voice is always emphasized. It is even extended into a longer phrase in one of the most magical passages. It's one of my favorite parts in the piece. The guises that this motive appear under are so numerous as the piece goes on, it's hard to even enumerate them all, but here are a couple examples that are quite ingenious. It appears later on in rapid sixteenths, dropping from the treble, kind of suggesting rain droplets to my ear. Later we get the inverse, two-note groups that are gradually climbing the keyboard. It almost feels like our stream has found a noisy turning point in its course. And again descending magically to finish off the piece, gently from the upper reaches of the piano, and found slowed down in the very last cadence. So with all this variation, you might have already guessed it, the basis of this piece is the idea of variation, in the large scale but also in small scales. And it's a variation piece unlike any classical variation model. There's one expansive thematic statement with several different parts. This major section starts in A-flat major, and it eventually moves to E-flat major via E major. So there is a tonic dominant polarity, just like in a classical sonata, but it's handled very differently. At the point when the music reaches E-flat major, he undercuts the arrival by using modal mixture. And all that modal mixture means is that you use chords from the minor key in a major key context, or vice versa. So here he's in E-flat major, but he uses the 4 and the 6 chords that would be found in E-flat minor, while keeping the tonic chord in the major. That's why this passage actually sounds so incredibly magical. It's because of this modal mixture. You're not sure if you're in major or minor at any given moment. Then after this first major section, which I've loosely called the theme, draws to a close, there begins a variation on this material, which also acts, it has a double function, as a recapitulation. So again, there are elements of sonata form here, although this is not really a sonata form movement. We do have in the first section tonic going to dominant. That's a very common element in sonata form. And then all the ideas are repeated, but this time in the home key. The first half of this variation recapitulation precisely mirrors the theme, but the variation technique is so wonderful and inspired that you might not even realize it. It almost sounds like he's just begun something totally new. Let's hear a few bars side by side of the theme and then the variation so that we can compare and clearly hear what Liszt is doing. Let's go a couple bars at a time. So the first couple bars in the theme. then in the variation. The next two bars of the theme are extended one bar in the variation. So here's the theme. And the varied form. Then the last 5 measures in the theme. And now the variation. It's quite extraordinary, the imagination that he brings to bear on this already very complex theme. And beyond this more general outline of a theme and variation, the interior motives, as we already saw with the sighing motive, are also varied gradually throughout the whole piece, almost independent of the large-scale division. That's partly what gives the piece this organic sense of continual growth. So for example, the hand crossing that we saw in the beginning. Later on, the 16th note accompaniment becomes shared between the hands, and the right hand leaps up to snatch these bright octaves in the treble. Next, the octaves are expanded to chords. They become little splashes of color. And later on in the climax of the piece, they become kind of glittering explosions. Like many of Liszt's greatest works, most of them in fact, this piece went through several different versions. There is an initial version in the album d'un Voyageur, which is rarely played, but it's also quite lovely. To my ear, even though this earlier version is very nice in its own way, Liszt's technical writing had not yet reached the incredible heights of subtlety and precision that they do in the revised versions. I think that's generally the case, from my perspective anyway. The accompaniment is much simpler, and it's also much harder to kind of get the right sound, I think, from what Liszt writes in the original. That's generally what happened as Liszt revised his earlier versions. Things that were a little bit awkward in the originals are streamlined and made more original at the same time. There's much more of a distinctive sound to his later versions. However, I'll include a link to a recording of the original version if you are interested in comparing. Just an example of this kind of subtlety that I'm talking about in Liszt's technical writing. Let's take a look at this scalar passage. This is very interesting for me because a student was just recently asking me about how composers make figuration like this sound really interesting and beautiful. So this little explanation is for you, Ezra. What Liszt does here is his basis is a B-flat dominant 7th chord. But he adds extra chromatic steps at certain moments to give it a hybrid kind of scale arpeggio effect. But he chooses where to fill in the arpeggio very carefully. He doesn't fill in every step. And at the very end of the scale arpeggio, he lets it change into a chromatic scale. And voila, there is the final effect. You should also note that this is supremely comfortable to play. Liszt writes it so that it fits the hand like a glove. So that also affects his choice of where to add the half steps in between the chord. And Liszt has provided his own very unique but very comfortable fingering. The musical image and the technical solution are so closely married that they are inextricable, as they always are in Liszt's greatest works. So I'm sure many of you might be aware of these first two versions, but I think most people out there are not going to be aware that there is a third version of this piece as well, which is very rarely played, even more rarely played than the first version. In large part, it is identical to the second version, but Liszt added these 7 bars for his student Giovanni Sgambati in 1863. This is much in keeping with the style that he was developing in his later works, and the music more gradually kind of disintegrates before our eyes. It's difficult to even choose which I prefer. I'm so used to the second version without the longer coda, but this one also is very beautiful and kind of grew on me as I was looking at it. So I'm going to include a performance of the alternative ending right after the first version has ended, so you can kind of get a feel for what it sounds like when you've heard the rest of the piece before it. And maybe there'll be a few people out there who are interested in playing this piece and including this alternative ending in your performances. So to conclude, although this piece is not long, it contains a breadth, a kind of stillness and wonder that never fades, even after repeated playings and hearings. It remains for me one of the most treasured of all Liszt's works. So please enjoy the complete performance and support the channel if you can. An easy way to do that, of course, is to hit the like button and subscribe and come back next week. I'll have more great music for you. If you are able to make a financial donation, that's also wonderful. www.patreon.com/independent pianist is a great way to do that. You can sign up for monthly recurring pledges, and sustained support like that really will help me to put more and more focus onto this channel. I'm hoping to make this channel kind of my job eventually. So the more financial support I can get, the better I'll be able to do that. If you're interested in studying with me, I might be able to take 1 or 2 more students at the moment, so send me an email at cole@independentpianist.com if that interests you. Or if you'd like to book me for a solo performance, you can reach me at the same email. I'm always happy to appear in person to play any of my music. So until next time, please take care. Keep practicing.